Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, there were two news situations that seemed to be improving, but that got a sudden reversal this week as government warned not so fast. One was the COVID recovery as the numbers moved in discouraging ways. The other was in the tropics, where despite a storm-free season so far, hurricane watchers issued a follow-up report saying things could get worse. We will follow up to both of these stories tonight, as well as the latest in the upcoming elections, plus monitoring dead zones in the Gulf, and our Future Watch segment checks on the long-coming resurfacing of Magazine Street near the zoo. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Dave Cohen, news director, WWL Radio, Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, and Mark Schleifstein, environmental reporter, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. Let's go over to Dave first, and really discouraging news about COVID and the Delta variant and children now getting it more, and it's just all really discouraging.
Yeah, there was nothing good that we heard this week about this Delta variant of the coronavirus in Louisiana, other than the fact that the governor said that since the 1st of July, vaccinations have increased more than 300% in Louisiana. So apparently, the scary statistics that we hear day after day in the hospitals now overflowing with patients, 50 hospitals in Louisiana now saying we can't take any more patients. Ochsner alone in 10 days turned away 300 patients because they just don't have the staff to care for any more patients with so many COVID patients in the hospital. Today alone, the governor announced there are 2,421 COVID patients in Louisiana hospitals. That's a record. We broke the record that was set yesterday, which broke the record that was set the day before, which broke the record that was set on Tuesday. So the pattern is not good, and there's no end in sight right now, because even with all these additional people getting their vaccinations now, we know it takes 6 weeks till you're fully vaccinated, or 7 weeks, depending on which of the 2-shot regimens you choose, or 2 weeks for the Johnson & Johnson single shot. So the only way that officials say we can do anything to slow down this spread is by wearing masks. And we have seen a lot of folks, including the state's attorney general and others, rallying around protests and insisting that masks should not be worn and that the government is overreaching its authority and trying to force obedience by telling people to wear masks, insisting that the science doesn't support it. Well, if you heard the governor's news conference this afternoon, speaker after speaker, doctor after doctor, expert after expert from the state, the federal, and the local level all said masks scientifically work to reduce the spread of COVID at a time when we have not seen it this bad ever before, and kids are going back to schools.
Yeah.
You know, today, many classrooms were reopened, more open next week. And there was a protest outside the St. Tammany Parish School Board meeting just last night of a few dozen parents saying they won't send their kids to school if they have to wear masks because they believe that it's an overreach of government power and that it is just an effort to control their children and that it doesn't protect them at a time when 1 out of every 5 positive cases now of COVID in Louisiana is a child. The ICU at Children's Hospital is full of COVID patients. In the neonatal ICU and the pediatric ICU, children as young as newborns, just days old now, with COVID. And 400 children nationwide in the past week have died from COVID.
And of course, we're talking about the Delta variant, which is just a more contagious, variant of the original COVID, and it also can cause greater illness in some cases.
There's no doubt. The viral load that comes with this Delta variant has been measured to be sometimes 1,000 times higher than the original COVID-19 that we saw when we dealt with in the first surge. Here in the fourth surge, it is getting far more people sick, far more quickly, and with a lot more of a viral load. And it's attacking people much younger, largely because older people are, by and large, vaccinated. It's the younger folks who overwhelmingly are not. Now, that's not a rule, but statistically, it's more younger people who are not vaccinated than older people.
But let me jump in for a second here, too. I mean, people who are vaccinated, fully vaccinated, are getting infected But the
Yes.
chances to get infected if you're vaccinated are far less.
Yeah, two important messages that we've heard from the Louisiana Department of Health and the governor this week. One, you're 25 times less likely to get infected and test positive for COVID if you're vaccinated. Two, 90% of all hospitalizations and new cases are people who are unvaccinated. So only 1 out of 10 people who test positive and 1 out of 10 people who are hospitalized are people who are unvaccinated. Plus, the hospitals tell us that those people who are in the ICU and those people who are dying, it is extremely rare. If most hospitals have not seen anybody who has been vaccinated who needs intensive care or who dies from COVID. It's almost exclusively people who are unvaccinated. And there's a lot of pressure on the FDA now to give full approval to the vaccinations, because one of the arguments many of the anti-vaxxers present is that, well, it's not fully approved by the FDA. It's only a conditional use. And they don't believe that that means it's been vetted fully enough to mean that they feel like it's safe. Well, the FDA is taking its time because it feels like it has to be able to back up that it's done its due diligence and done everything it would do with any other vaccination in order to give it full approval. The good news is they have a massive sample size because more people have had this vaccine in a shorter time than any vaccine in world history. But it's looking like next month is what we're hearing now when we may get that full approval. But the legal community doesn't believe that's necessary. We are hearing over and over again from judges and constitutional legal scholars that businesses can, and many are, some of the largest employers in the nation now are requiring vaccinations, that schools can, and many are. Here in New Orleans, almost all the colleges and universities are requiring the vaccine. LSU is not requiring it, but saying you'll have to have frequent testing if you do not get vaccinated.
Another thing I wanted you to touch on before we run out of time for this segment is monoclonal antibodies. We're hearing messages. We heard it from the governor and today from Dr. Cantor, state health officer.
Yeah, and a number of urgent cares and other medical facilities now have the antibodies on hand. And they are saying that their evidence shows, and we heard from the federal surge team that's come into Louisiana just this week to help supplement the staffing shortages that hospitals in the state are experiencing, that they have seen on the ground without a doubt that when you get these antibody infusions, when you get the actual antibodies from someone who's had COVID, developed a protection against it, and they've harvested those antibodies and put them in you, that it'll greatly reduce your chances of getting seriously ill and of dying, and shortens the process that the virus takes within your body so you get well more quickly.
Yeah, Dr. Cantor said today that if you are diagnosed positive and you're particularly in a high-risk group, or if you're starting to have symptoms, ask about getting those monoclonal antibodies, which, as you said, is an infusion, which apparently does help keep the disease, in check.
Yeah, it helps your body begin that fight and keep it from getting as bad as it could in many cases, not all cases. But the problem is finding them now. 211 is really a great resource if you want to find treatment, if you want to find testing, if you want to find vaccinations. It's not a bad place to start because right now, like we said, emergency room waits are ridiculously long. Emergency rooms around the state have patients on gurneys and in chairs sitting in hallways just waiting for the staff to be able to see them because we're in a critical nursing shortage right now.
Yeah.
There's nowhere near enough nurses to treat all the patients that are coming in, and emergency rooms are begging people, if you don't have a true emergency, if it's not life or death, go to an urgent care. Go to your general practitioner, go to a clinic, go somewhere else because they can't help you.
Yeah, hospitals are really, really being taxed right now.
Absolutely.
And also emergency medical services, too. They're really busy right now, too. All right, Dave.
And they have a COVID outbreak themselves. New Orleans EMTs and paramedics and their dispatchers all had COVID run through, and dozens of them had to be treated or quarantined. And so there was a question when someone dialed 911 if they had any medical emergency, if there would be an ambulance to show up. The city called in a Acadian ambulance because so many of the New Orleans ambulances and their crews were unable to go to work.
And even with these numbers climbing, so the governor says we're not at the peak yet.
No, there's no indication that the peak is coming anytime soon either.
We need to be careful. Okay, Dave, thanks a lot. All right, Mark, over to you. More good news. Hurricane season, it's going to sort of start picking up, so they tell us.
That's true. We're entering the more active portion of the season, which the height of the season officially occurs September 10th. For some odd reason, that's when the most storms historically have occurred. But what was explained this week by NOAA was that their prediction for the number of hurricanes, tropical storms that are going to occur this year has not reduced and actually has increased. It's ticked up a tiny bit from their estimate at the beginning of the season. And they give out this thing at this time of the season, and largely in part to push people to make sure that they have their that they're ready for the season, that they're ready for a storm. And it only takes one. We've been lucky this year. There have been 5 named storms, one of which was a hurricane. None of those were really significant, but we're still expecting a significant number by the end of the season, which ends officially on November 30th. But the other thing is that it won't be as many, they don't think, as last year, which was a record 30 hurricanes. So,
and how many serious ones are they predicting right now?
Well, at the moment, what they're thinking is that there also hasn't been an uptick in their estimate of that, but it's still 3 to 5 major hurricanes, Category 3 or higher. So, the thing that we should remember here is that it only takes one.
Yeah.
And we should have our preparations in place now, know where to go, and know that when an emergency manager says this is the time to leave, that you should get ready to go and have plans in advance on where you're going and what you're taking with you, and that your family members are also taken care of.
Mark, let me ask you a question I think a lot of people have wondered about, but have been too shy or embarrassed to ask, and that is with COVID and with tropical season, with the changes in pressure and weather and all the things that go on, could one have the effect on another?
Not really. The reality is that we have a large population in this country in the populated areas. There's enough room between people that the virus is going to spread no matter what. There may be some seasonal differences in when the virus is actually spreading, but that's also really unknown because our history with this virus is only just over a year long, and with the Delta variant, not even that long, and there could be other variants out there that also may act differently.
So, Mark, with all the talk of climate change, is that are we seeing an impact on the severity of the storms and also the amount of moisture in a storm?
All of the above. The concern about climate change, and NOAA was repeating this during their press conference this week, is threefold. First of all, the winds are going to be higher, as much as 10 to 15%. And what that means at the upper end is that we're going to have more intense hurricanes. There'll be more of those Category 3 and 4 hurricanes that occur and above. But in addition, each individual storm seems to have picked up more rainfall, and that's a problem for interior areas that are not going to be getting the direct winds as much, but are going to get the rain. And then the third issue is sea level rise. And sea level rise has nothing to do with the storm, but when a storm comes along with storm surge, it's on top of that sea level rise. So along the Louisiana Gulf Coast, we've already seen significant sea level rise, and it's continuing. So the water levels will actually be higher.
So July it was a quiet month, which of course we didn't object to that. That's for sure. And there was some sand coming over from Africa, Sahara sands. Did that really keep the hurricanes away?
Well, the sand is an indicator of dry air in the upper level of the atmosphere that is blowing through that area, and that has been keeping the formation of storms at bay during July a little bit. But it's a time of year type of thing, and that will be dropping off as we move into this more intense part of the season. The other key thing there is that we're seeing or expecting to see colder water in the eastern Pacific, which will mean less winds at the upper atmosphere that tend to blow apart hurricanes in the Atlantic when that does happen. And that's expected to pick up end of September through December, so more chance of storms forming during that time.
And the Atlantic in the La Nina cycle later on?
That's the La Nina
That's the
cycle
Nina,
that
okay.
I'm talking about.
All right. Okay, Mark, bearer of good news, but you're right. We definitely, everybody, you need to stay prepared in this part of the world. We definitely do. Thanks a lot. Okay, Dawn, over to you. It can be a bumpy ride if you want to go to the Audubon Zoo.
It's a very bumpy ride. Right now, the road is so bad that I've been clocking it just personally lately, not with anything legitimately scientific. And most people are driving about 9 miles an hour as they cross that pathway from Leak Avenue all the way to Nashville Avenue along Magazine Street. It's super bumpy. A bit here in this seat on this show saying the project's going to start and they're going to get it done, because I think this is at least my third, perhaps fourth time on this show saying they're ready to do it. It's finally happening. I'm told by the city of New Orleans they're ready to do it. It's finally happening. I looked back through newspaper cycles, my own personal notes. I think we started talking about this in 2010, that it was going to get finished. It's a major city, obviously. It's the entry point to Audubon Park. It's the entry point to Audubon Zoo. It's the entry point to the riverfront fly to be able to get up there and see the river. And it's in dire need of resurfacing. Supposedly, within the next month or so, work will get underway. It's a year-long project. It is a full project. It's not just resurfacing the roadway. It's a full-depth reconstruction project that will therefore include replacement of the underground utilities, water, sewage, and drainage, as well as resurfacing of the roadway. Part of that project will also include much better marked crosswalks, ADA acceptable sidewalks and entryways. The current bid on that project is $5.5 million. If you look back over the history, it's been all over the place. I asked what's the difference between this project and the one we talked about in 2010 and 2017 and 2019. I did not get an answer to that question to know kind of how this project relates to how we've always been talking about it. What will happen, though, is there will always be at least one-way vehicular traffic.
I'm going to have you say that again, because I'm hearing you break up. Could you say that again? There will be what?
Traffic going in at least one direction for the length of this project. They will not completely ever shut it down. You will always have access one way. 2 weeks before work starts, neighbors in the area at least, and therefore the media, will get alerted to how it's going to work, where the detours are going to be, who can get through, how and why. And they're supposed to release a whole fact sheet of how this will time out and who will be able to go which way, where, when, and how. The whole project is supposed to take at least a year once it gets started. I'm told that it did for a variety of reasons and having to construct plans. Hopefully this time it's it, because it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. And to see tourists coming through, if we ever get through COVID and get tourists fully back and at miles an hour, it just does not speak well for the city.
It'll go all the way up to Nashville?
Between Nashville and Leak Avenue along Magazine Street. So the entire stretch in front of the zoo, from really where you are along River Road until you're in official Uptown past the zoo.
And it starts when? When will it
It's
begin?
supposed to start this month, but an official start date has not yet been released.
All right.
That's one of those
Well,
believe it when you see it things.
Right,
because
we'll look for it.
For 25 years, I've
The
always
sky
wondered.
is falling, the sky is falling. The project's starting, the project's starting. We'll see if maybe in a couple of weeks I can come back and say, I was right, it's starting.
Yeah, I've never understood why, as heavily traveled as that is, and as much demand as there is on that one stretch of road, that it's never been better, because, I mean, it's been bad for a generation now. And you're right, if you go 9 miles an hour, you're probably risking your suspension.
You still have a very
Right.
bumpy ride, right? All right. Thanks a lot, Don and Dave. Let's go over to Errol right now, because coming up in the fall, and boy, it's going to come sooner than we can imagine, elections in Orleans Parish.
Yeah, and the most important election now is obvious. It's going to be the council member at large election. There are 2 seats. One's occupied by Helena Moreno, who's an incumbent who has minor opposition. So the Channel 12 election night desk can project right now that Helena Moreno is going to win her seat. The other one, though, was Jason Williams's seat. Jason Williams was elected district attorney, and so there's a pretty hotly contested field in there. This job of council member at large was created in 1954. That's sort of like a defining year in New Orleans politics, because they created a new city charter. And when they did it, they created the present council system, in which you had 5 district council members and 2 at large. And the 2 at large alternate serving as president of the council. And I think at the time they were perceived as being probably future mayors-elect. In fact, there have been 8 mayors elected since that charter went in effect, and 3 of them were council members at large. Moon Landrieu, Vic Schiro, who was the council member at large, and Sidney Bartholomew. Now, Landrieu defeated Jimmy Fitzmaurice, who was also a council member at large. And so they've always been in and around mayoral politics. And so whenever you look at these elections, I think you're always looking at a possible leading contender for the next race. And so anyway, the race to watch is for the other seat, the seat that was Jason Williams. And running for this is Kristen Palmer, who represents District A, which is the West Bank and parts of into the French Quarter and into Bywater.
Is that District A?
Yeah.
Okay.
Isn't that it?
Or is there C? The French Quarter and then Algiers.
District C.
Yeah.
It's District C, okay. Jared Brosset, who represents District D, which is the Gentilly area, and P.J. Morrell, who's not in the council, who was a state senator, and who's term limited, but whose family is well known. In fact, his mother used to be a council member at large. And so it's 3 people with credentials going after this one seat, and so it's going to be a pretty important election.
Yeah, J.P. Morrell, also the other one of the candidates. Yeah, that's going to be a race among the 3 of them, no doubt about that. And then there are other council races too, right? Like for the one in New Orleans East, the contest there as well.
Yeah, and that's Cindy Wynn, who's the incumbent. And what's interesting about this race is Oliver Thomas, who's the past council member from Uptown at that time, from District B, is running against that. So it's unusual where you have a former council member running against a council member, and the former council member was from a different district.
So we'll really start seeing the campaign starting. It's going on right now, but the real push after Labor Day, right?
But the main race is going to be this at-large race.
Yeah. Okie dokie. Thanks a lot, Errol. Mark, let's go on over to you. Dead zone in the Gulf, and it's not getting any smaller.
That's very, unfortunately, very true. So the dead zone is an area of low oxygen between 0 and 2 parts per million that is actually at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, right along the shoreline, and it causes those organisms that have the ability of escaping, shrimp, fish, crabs, they scuttle away. But others, basically the food that they live on, that are living in the mud on the bottom, die. And so it's a significant problem, and it's been that way for multiple generations now. And how it's caused is you have nutrients, largely fertilizer from Midwest farms, plus some nutrients that come from sewage upriver, coming down the Mississippi River and the Atchafalaya River. It goes out into the Gulf in fresh water in the spring and early summer. That fresh water, it lies over the Gulf salt water as a layer. The fresh water, you have algae that blooms, it dies, it falls to the bottom, it's eaten up by microbes, and in doing so, the microbes use up all the oxygen. And there have been efforts made by the states and the federal government under the Clean Water Act to try to reduce the nutrients, but nothing's really worked. There's been millions of dollars spent and huge efforts underway upriver to create new wetlands and figure out buffer strips around farms to capture nutrients before they go in the river. And the reality, though, is that both because of climate change causing more rainfall that we've seen over the last half dozen years in the lower river in the spring, but also because the nutrients are just so much, it's not going away. This year's dead zone is 6,334 square miles. The guys who do this gave up trying to compare that to states and said, okay, well, it's the size of 10 Lakes Pontchartrain, which is 640 square miles. That's a good way of doing it. Or the combined size of Lakes Ontario and Erie. So you can see how big an area that is that's affected by this.
Mark, is this related at all to what you see along the shorelines? Like I know like at the Gulf Shores where they talk about the jubilees. Is that the same sort of thing?
Right. So jubilees occur when all of the fish run the wrong way towards the shore to get away from the low oxygen water and end up on the shoreline and die. That's basically what a jubilee is. This year along the Louisiana coast, that were pretty much jubilee conditions because the worst low oxygen areas are right on the coast.
And no improvement in sight?
Again, there are efforts underway for voluntary efforts by the states, but the federal government still is sort of caught by federal law and not being able to actually enforce things. You know, like they would do with a sewage treatment plant. They can do it for them, but they can't do it for farms. It's non-point source pollution.
Okay. All right, so an ongoing problem. Time for other stories, real quick, everybody. E, start with you.
Well, it's August, and so that means one thing, quarterback controversies. And we haven't had one for the Saints for a long time. We're waiting to see about that between Taysom Hill and Jameis Wilson. But the new one that came up this week was Miles Brennan at LSU, who was injured last year and was supposed to be playing again this year, and who got hurt, broke a bone, and so now that's going to be a new issue also.
Okay, real quick, guys. Dave, to you.
Cruising starts in less than a month again. According to Carnival Cruise Lines, they will take their first ship out of New Orleans in just 4 weeks.
Okay, Dawn?
Errol, great minds think alike. Football season officially kicks off for the Saints on Saturday, a week from tomorrow, in Baltimore with their first preseason game. So it'll be fun to see who's starting.
Yes, it will. Okay, Mark, over to you to wrap it up.
So the Corps of Engineers has produced a final proposal to raise the levee system around New Orleans by enough to keep us at that 1% level, 100-year supposed level of protection. Is going to cost $1.7 billion for the initial lifts that will be done by 2028 and continue through the next 50 years.
Okay, very good. Thanks a lot, you guys, for joining us. Thank you for watching. See you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.